guess we'll deploy WebTop 682, this Tomcat 833 using port 8080. And we'll go through the configuration that we need to do on Tomcat first of all. And most of it's set, so I'll just kind of go over it. I have this environment set up to use this JDK of Java 1.891, and how I set that is in Tomcat Ben, and it's just in the server imp, which is a file you have to manually create. It's not there by default. And when you set the Java home, because when you launch Tomcat, it will automatically set the Catalina home variable. Then you can you skip out 2 directories to the root, and then Java, and that's the location it's at. And you can use the variable that Tomcat sets. And then this is just setting the Java ops to use, well, up to 2 gigs of RAM or memory. Let's see.
And 2 gigs is good, right?
2 gigs. You can actually use 1 gig in a lab environment. If you're going to have more than one application or a few applications deploying on Tomcat, you'll want to have probably more, like 2 gigs deployed. And in a customer environment, depending on how many deployments and how many users are connecting, you'll want to up that. And I'll show you later where you can look and kind of gauge and get an idea of how much RAM is being used and when you may want to add more physical or include more RAM in this parameter here. So that's setting the variable for Tomcat. For 682, and that's including most of the other deployments, the context has changed. So the other thing you have to set is, normally you'd set the context in here. In the past, we'd always set it to be context HTTP only false. But now that WebTop, I think 681 and 682 both use a different context setting. And if you have multiple deployments of DA and Tomcat and other things, or sorry, DA and WebTop, then you'll want to go ahead and set it so there's a variable setting for each of those deployments. And that is set in the server.xml. And I see a problem. That won't work right, which is in this folder. What did I do?
We were running a different one for a while. You and I changed that at one point.
Yeah, but I thought because I had it in 9080. Well, I'll go fix this real quick. So these are the ports that need to be set. Oh, but I didn't do it there. Maybe I didn't save the file after I changed it back. Okay. Okay, and so right here it's just above the last closing host statement, and this is where you'll want to add the context for each of your deployments. So for example, in this one I have WebTop 6.7 SP2 patch 25, which will have the false HTTP only, and 6.82 patch 6, which will have true. Now, the one thing about this is anytime you change context, so what you have to do is you want to make sure that the non-Tomcat deployments, so anything that's a WDK deployment, such as WebTop, DA, TaskBase, any of those, have a specific setting context in the server.xml. In this case, we only have the WebTop 6.8. Well, since we're going to deploy it brand new, we'll start from scratch. So we'll leave this open, and then what we'll do is go out and get a deployment of WebTop. Here's an out-of-the-box WebTop WAR file. And one important thing that I want to mention is when you move WAR files, you can move them on the same OS between folders and files. You can move the files. But if you're moving them across the network from one server to another server, especially from Windows to Linux or vice versa, you want to make sure that that file is that it's compressed using WAR, zip, or 7-zip, or whatever you want to use to keep that from getting corrupted. So what we'll do is we'll go in here and we'll paste the WAR file here. And Tomcat is able to deploy this WAR file as a WAR. I don't like to do that, but you can if you decide to. I'll show you both ways. But what you want to do is you want to extract the file.
What's pros and cons to using the WAR and not the WAR?
The reason is because, so basically what you have to do is you have to go in, make your edits and changes, then you have to re-WAR. Basically, you re-zip the file. WAR is a zip with a different extension name. You have to re-WAR it back into the file, and then it stays there. Now, what happens is when, and this will be gone, when you deploy Tomcat or when you start up Tomcat, it'll take that WAR file and extract it and create a file just like this. Now, what the problem is if you make any changes in here in the extracted file, those changes aren't made into the WAR file. So if you want the changes to be permanent, you have to re-extract the WAR file, make the changes, zip it back up.
So long term, it's just a lot easier to not do it as the WAR.
Yep. But there are operating systems like JBoss and others that have to be, I think JBoss requires them to be, they have to be jarred. So a lot of these configuration files that we're going to deal with, when you deploy on JBoss, they have to be jarred up and put in, and they're extracted. It's just another step that causes problems, and it's a little confusing. But so when I just copied this from the other directory, and what I like to do is I just remove it. It's gone. Now, if I want to move this to another server, or what I like to do is when I deploy WebTop or DA or whatever application, and everything's working the way it should, what'll happen, I'll take that and I'll re-zip it. I use 7-zip because it works across a lot of different types of zip formats. And I'll re-zip it and I'll name it like a working version of whatever. And that way, if I need to deploy it again, much like the ones that we have over here, I just know I can just go grab that one, unzip it, and it'll work. In the case of when you send it to a customer, though, you want to make sure that it's in a zip format rather than like 7-zip or a different format, or WAR if you send them to them. Okay. So by default, all versions of WebTop from the dawn of time till 6.8.2 all come with the name WebTop. The only difference is this version properties file will have what the version is, and it is 6 is the platform, 8.2, it's 6.8.2, but 868.2. They have it just as one number here. And then this 4 dots area will be, or 40 area will be the patch level. And then this is another, this has to do with the version within the versions, but only engineering never sees those.
That's like the build number, isn't it?
Yeah, the build number. And again, that's just something. Now, that being said, customers can use that for their own. If they make any like customizations or anything like that, they can. They wouldn't want to do it here. I'll show you where they'd want to do it, but they can use their own version and build numbers too. Okay, so let's see. So with WebTop, the very first thing you're going to need to do is set your DFC properties, which is this file in the WebINF classes directory, and that file is what the WDK application uses to connect to the content server. And to do that, I recommend, not everybody uses this, but I recommend setting 5 settings to start out with. So when you're deploying WebTop for the first time, a brand new environment, you want to deploy it by itself with whatever application server you're using and set the 5 variables here alone, just by itself. That way, whenever you see any errors in the log, or if you're having problems, it's related only to that deployment. When you have multiple, say you're deploying WebTop 682 with DA, whenever you do that, it's going to include errors. So say DA is getting errors, they could be affecting what you're seeing with WebTop, and you're trying to fix a problem that WebTop doesn't have. So where you'll get these is, let me minimize this. And you'll go into your content server in that environment. So this is the content server in that environment. And what you'll do is you'll go into, on Windows, it'll be, you can get it quickly out of the server manager, utilities, and it's just this DFC properties. And so what you want I know there's more than the 5 lines here, but I'll just make it easier. Okay, so you'll just paste those in here. This line right here, actually both these lines, they don't have to be here. You can just do it with these 3 lines and then your doc broker lines. These will be fine for the crypto and other for 7.2 and 7.3, but you want to keep it as clean as possible and don't do any other DFC properties or log files, different places or whatever. There are other settings, but you want to just keep it very clean to start with. It just makes it a lot easier to do troubleshooting during the deployment. So that right there is from the content server, which allows it to communicate with the content server in that environment. I'm going to close it so it doesn't stay open. So the next thing we need to do is...
Oh, and just to kind of put in, we're on page, this is all on page like 30 of the install guide, just for future notice.
Page 30 of the install guide, yes. The other thing we need to do that's very important in releases post 6.8 is you have to set the preferences and presets encrypted password configuration, and I will go through those steps. What I've done is I've created a few, what would you call them, a few scripts that really help with that, and I just created a shortcut that I didn't need. Whoops. And so what I'll do is, let me see if there's one out here. This will be available somewhere, sometime. We'll put this in the video or somewhere else when we decide where it's at. So this right here, I just keep a copy of these on all my deployments. And then just a batch file. And I'll open it up and go over that. So this right here is the batch file I use to create the encrypted password. And this is a very important part. The reason is if you don't follow these steps precisely, it will cause problems. You'll get errors, and if they don't get fixed, it can create import, exports, a whole bunch of other problems. Let's see. So basically what this is it says, do you want to create the encrypted password? You say yes or no. If it's no, it'll kick you out of the script. And then it will set the, oh, in this I don't need this. Maybe I do. Let me try to. I have to remember if it's. Okay. So in a lot of my environments, I don't usually set install Java just because I have to change the version of Java so much. I'm just going to delete this. Let's see. So what this is, it sets the Java home for encrypting, and you want to use, if possible, use the same version of Java that you're using when you deploy WebTop, especially if you're in an environment, say you're using WebSphere, where they like to use the IBM version of JDK. You want to make sure that you encrypt the password with the IBM version of JDK. Otherwise, when they try to decrypt, they'll come up with incorrect passwords. So that's the first thing. The second thing you want to do is you want to remove any key store files. And in this case, let me go back to where we were at. If you've tried to connect and it failed, whenever you try to connect to the content server, what will happen is you'll get key store files in here, a DFC key store file. Now, if you have a DFC key store file and then you come back here and you just run the regular script that they have in the deployment guide, which is, I'm not sure what page, it'll create the WDK key store, but the DFC and the WDK will have different creation dates. And if that happens, then you'll get an error. It's a padded encryption error if they're out of sync. So this script automatically removes any previous key stores from this location, and then we'll create new ones. Let's see. So it removes the old key store files, then it runs a script. with the settings. I've shortened these from the one in the guide to encrypt the password. So that's what we'll do now. If you're working in an environment that you're not sure what the DFC presets and preferences are that are in WebTop, you'll want to test a clear text password. I won't go into that, but you'll just want to, the default is WebTop for DA, WebTop, all the different versions for each of those service accounts. So you can log in with that service account. It's DFC. This is where we're going to have to edit this or add something in, Jen. Maybe give what I don't have it up. Does
this actually encrypt the newer, because before 682 there was the older password, and then for 682 there was the newer, more secure one? Is that what this does, or am I in a different thought process?
So as long as this is the file in here, so this file right here is a class file that actually encrypts or decrypts. So that's why you want to use like the same versions of WebTop. 682 all along the board will be the same, and it's by the DFC. So if it's DFC 72, 73, whatever. But over time, this one can change to a newer version. And if you encrypted it with a newer class file or an older class file, vice versa, in one environment, then you'll probably want to go through this process again to re-encrypt the password for the new environment. Another thing that we can add to the video later if we want to, or maybe have it a separate part of this, is you can do a distributed key store file. And so that, say you have all different kinds of WebTops and DAs and stuff, you can configure it so all of the D2 or all of the different deployments will use that one WDK key store no matter where they are. And I think it's WebLogic, in some cases WebSphere, that you just can't fix a problem unless you set it up that way. So that's an important part, and we can add that to at least a note to this video, maybe point to another video or maybe the KB article for that.
Password encrypt.
Did it?
Look at it make things.
See what I did wrong? Oh, how did I not catch this before? So I set the Java home here, which is fine, but it wasn't calling Java home when it called Java, because Java, there was no context around calling Java, so I had to set the location for Java here. All right. Sorry, sidetrack. All right. So back to what we're doing here. What you want to do is, first of all, maybe open a new tab, and you'll want to get the encrypted password from this. And put it in a new document. So what you'll want to do is remember that this encrypted password right here that was just created also is associated with these two files. And they should have the same date and time, which they do. So these two files are always associated with this encrypted password. If you want to make another deployment, you can copy these same files over to another deployment, but you'll always want to use these two together with that encrypted password. And then what you'll want to do is you have to edit the WDK app INI, or XML, sorry. And in this file, whoops.
Not how you spell preset.
Okay, presets. All right. Drill down and find the presets location. But you want to make these changes to these settings in the custom app XML. So what you want to do is go into your editor and copy from the presets opening statement to the preferences repository close statement.
And this is on page 32 of the install guide.
There we go. And then it will be, I believe it's between the application location. Now, you can leave it like this and just add the password in here. But the only one you really have to have, whoops. You have to have the presets opening statement. And then because none of this information right here is changing, oh, we have to get these right. And none of this information is changing from the default. And come on, this information. And this information. So these are the only settings that are changing. So you can whittle it down to these settings. And it's a good idea to keep your preferences and presets and preferences password the same. It just makes it easier, but you don't have to. You can make them separate passwords. But if you do a different password for, say, presets or preferences, you can run that same script again, but you'll want to use the same key store files that were created. So you want to change your script so it doesn't delete them, and it will use the same ones. And then when it decrypts them, it'll decrypt the same password, no matter. So one encrypted password for presets will encrypt correctly, and same with preferences. So what we'll want to do is get this encrypted password and just place it in the password. Okay, and then you can save that. Now, what my recommendation is whenever you do that and you have several deployments, you can create a folder and then what I like to do is I'll put that along with key stores. And that way, if you want to redeploy that, those are the files you'll need to do. And if your encrypted password gets lost or something, it's always right there, and you can go get it. Let's see. close this now. And this. Okay, so at this point, what we need to do is go and make sure all the changes in Tomcat are set the correct way with being able to deploy this. There is one setting, and I've only seen this in DA recently, but sometimes you'll get an error that it's with bad coding where they've put a space in the coding, and what this does is it tells it to ignore white spaces and basically put them together. So this is a setting you can put in the Catalina properties. It'll fix that. It's just, it doesn't hurt anything. It's just a good idea to have it in there so you don't see those errors. There's KB articles in that, or we can make these files available. Now, I know some some people like to put set the context to false here. So it's always false unless it's different. I've had problems with deployments, and I don't know if this is specific what it is. I don't do that, but if you want to set this default to false and then make the changes in the server.xml, you can try that. I don't do it. Just one more thing that may cause me problems. So now what we need to do, we're going to apply the patch, that deployment. So we go into WebTop, and then go to the local machine here, C. I just realized that probably has, no, that's just the cache file, okay. The WebTop, here's patch 6, and again, with the numbering, it has WebTop 682.00 patch, and then the patch number will be, so zeros will end. So this is patch 6, not 60, and then it will go up from here. 16 will be, 0160, and so on. And then what I like to do, again, this is why I like to use 7-zip, because it'll handle all the different types of files. And what I like to do in this situation with the patches is I like to highlight them and then just drag and drop them into the deployment. And it'll ask you if you want to replace them. And yes, you do. Now, since we've applied the patch, if you look in here, you'll have a versions property and then a versions text file. And if you open or version text file, if you open the version text file, you'll see that it's that numbering with patch 6.
Yay, patch file.
Yeah. Yay. So if you go into a customer's deployment and they only have this file and no version here, it means that it's the base version with no patches applied. Okay. And what I like to do, customers sometimes do this, sometimes they don't. What I like to do is when I make it set up a deployment, I like to name it what it is. Customers won't necessarily want to do that because I need to close these. Because what will happen is it changes the linking to the application. So they usually want to have these consistent across all their deployments, no matter what version. But in the lab environment, it's just easier so that you have the difference. 682, patch 6. Okay. There. Okay. So what we'll want to do at this point is change the, sorry, I have to put this out. All right. We want to set the context for whatever we're having deployed. So for example, if you have DA or others, you want to make sure that you're adding that to the, or changing the context in the server XML. So we only have this one deployment. And so we'll go into this config in the server XML and same. And 682 is set to true. If you have any extra, like that one, the 68 or 67SP2 in there, it'll throw an error. So you want to make sure that you have all your WDK applications set. And save that. Okay. And we can close that. Let's see. Another thing that you have to set, which is in the install guide in Tomcat, is you have to set the pools. So the other recommendation I have, and most people don't set this, is I set the Tomcat users, and I use the management console all the time. It's very important to me for troubleshooting and kind of keeping an eye on how things are set and how they're running. And what I do is, actually, you don't need all these roles. All you need is these two roles. So you need the GUI manager, which it talks about up here. And you need to set the user admin. I just use password. And then you have to set the role of what that user has.
And for your last question, I did actually find that pooling information on page 26.
Page
so
26.
It's just the pooling and HTTP cookies support, multiple applications. That's the only section that's in that.
Okay. Okay, that's fine then. We can close that. So as far as the Tomcat users, again, that's very helpful. It just takes a few seconds, but it's very helpful to have it set. And you just want to go in and make sure that all the comments are, it's easier to see it in IE or in like a program like Notepad++, because you can actually see when the comments are commented out correctly. If they're highlighted like this, that means that comments are working. Or if you look at it as a text file, it's a lot more, well, that is a mess. Obviously, it's a lot more difficult. That's not even coming up right at all.
I think WordPad is the one you're looking for, not Notepad.
Yeah, we could, let's see, even WordPad though. Yeah, it's just, when you get down, it's really hard to tell if the comment out things are in the right place. So anyway, that's why I recommend this. If you just quickly open it in IE or use this, if they're highlighted and working, that means that they're active and your comments are in the right place. Okay, so we don't need this. I'm using another one. So as far as WebTop 682, we've applied the patch. We've added the DFC properties. We've encrypted the presets and preferences password and put them in the, ooh, did I? We didn't put it in the, I moved it. Could I check?
Sure, you moved it, but you didn't do anything with it.
I moved it. I didn't copy it. Okay. That would have been a problem, and we would have been getting errors. Okay, there we go. All right. So as far as Tomcat's concerned, it should all be up and running and ready to go. We've done all of the tests. The last thing I recommend is for you always deploy one application at a time by itself, and you make sure you clear all of the cache after each change. There's been so many times that I've been trying to fix a problem and haven't cleared the cache after making changes, and I keep running the same problem until I clear the cache, and then it works. So clearing the cache is important. There's no reason to keep old crappy logs. They don't mean anything. They have nothing to do with the current environment. So you can go ahead and get rid of them. So I have this script that goes in and basically deletes all of the cache that's set up, which is all the log files. One of the important files, depending on where you launch it, is this Documentum, because the Documentum log is an important log that's very helpful. Let's see. And that'll help you troubleshoot the current problem that you're working with. There's one other thing I wanted to discuss, and I can't think of what it is now. I can't remember what it is. Just before I started to bring up the subject, there's something else that was important I wanted to mention, and I can't think of it now. Anyway, so by default, the location of the where the Documentum folder is created, this is a temporary cache file, and it also creates all the logs. If you run it from a script, it puts it in the. This is true with Linux too. Wherever you launch, wherever your script is that it launches, it will automatically create it. That's like the default directory. That's where it's created. If you run Tomcat as a service, it will create the Documentum folder in this directory, unless the DFC properties specifies that it's placed somewhere else. One important thing is, usually it's on Linux that you see this, is wherever you have the directory written to, you want to make sure that the DM admin or whatever your service you're using to launch Tomcat has read and write permissions in that directory. Otherwise, the logs won't be created. That's usually the reason why we don't see that when we can't find the logs. It's because they don't have read and write permissions to do that. So again, I like to run things in my labs from a script. You can also go in and set them up to run as a service, but I don't do that. So at this point, you can start up the application. The other reason I like to is you can actually get a kind of a tell on the log, and it'll show you what's going on without having to open or run another tell or open a notepad to see it. You can actually see what's going on. And I'm hoping that I'm pretty sure I'm using different ports, if I remember right. I think
Probably not.
Okay. They are. I'm pretty sure. I think this is using the 7.0 ports. Let me see. This is my document for desktop.
Oh, 8080. Or no, wait.
Yeah, 7080. So it is. It's on a different port. Now, obviously, we do have logs or errors. So this is helpful, and why when you deploy one thing, it's always helpful to be able to do this so you know. So here it's saying that the preferences repository is not reachable. So with the size of that log, I'm thinking that I don't even think it launched because I'm pretty sure I'm thinking that it didn't connect, wasn't able to connect to the server. So we can do HTTP localhost port 8080. Okay, and this is where it's helpful with Tomcat when you have the Tomcat launching application launcher or administration, what do you call it, console page. That way we know that Tomcat launched and it's working. Admin, password. Come on. Okay, so it's saying it's running. So that's good. We'll have to take a look at that. And then you can also go into the server status in this, and this will let you know how you're doing on your memory spaces. These are all really low. We don't have anything. We have one application, and no one's even logged into it. So if you see these go up to like 80s and 90%, you're in jeopardy of like crashing your server. So you'll see customers that will get like memory errors, and I like to have them enable this so we can go in there and see how things are distributed and how things are looking. Let's see. So let's see if we can even get into WebTop 6.8.2 patch 6. Well, we got there.
Ooh. Okay.
Pretty good for a first try without even testing it, huh?
Right?
Yeah.